I always thought I knew what love was. I thought I knew what forgiveness was. But when I found out she was cheating on me, my world fell apart. I saw the texts, I smelled him, I saw the hidden glances, and still, I chose silence. To pretend I didn't know. To pretend everything was okay. But it tore me apart inside. Today I come here to tell my story. Not to seek pity, nor to attack anyone, but to share with you what I learned when I finally chose to free myself from this pain. If you've ever been through something similar, or if you know someone who needs to hear this story, stay with me until the end, because this is the truth. Love begins when we learn to love ourselves. Subscribe to the channel now for more real, deep, and soul-touching stories. I discovered it by chance, as so many things that change our lives do. It was a cloudy, late afternoon. The city seemed suspended in a humid silence, as if everything around us was just waiting for something to happen. I was looking through her phone without thinking much, looking for a photo she had taken of a funny note we had left on the fridge, and that was when I saw it. First, the notification flashing on the screen. Then, the open messages exposed like a punch in the face. They were simple words, almost banal, but each one of them was a blade cutting through my chest. "I can't stop thinking about last night," he said. And she responded with that shy smile emoji, a heart, a silent invitation to continue. My fingers trembled. The ground seemed to give way beneath my feet. I didn't know what to do. I screamed inside, but on the outside, I remained silent. I pretended nothing had happened. I put my phone back where it was, with almost criminal care, as if I didn't want to leave any trace of my pain. She came into the room, smiling, carrying 2 cups of tea, looking at me as if nothing was wrong, and in a way nothing was, because I hadn't said anything yet. I sat with her, drank the tea, and talked about trivial things, about the weather, about work, about the movie we could watch later. But inside, a storm was brewing. I spent the next few days as if I were living in a movie with the sound turned off. I watched her from afar, as if she were a wild, beautiful, treacherous animal, and I were an explorer lost in enemy territory. Every touch from her seemed colder, every kiss briefer. I began to notice the delays, the excuses, the glances at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. It was all there all the time. I just didn't want to see it before. But what could I do? Destroy everything? Confront her and listen to her empty apologies, her pleas for forgiveness that deep down I knew couldn't fix what was broken? I chose silence. I chose to pretend, not because I was a coward, but because I still loved her, or at least I loved what she represented to me. Because I was afraid to admit that what we had built together was a lie, and I didn't know what would be left of me after that. The weeks dragged on like a slow-motion movie. I heard her laughter on the phone, her whispers as she pulled away, the kisses I knew were no longer meant for me. At night, we lay side by side, our bodies separated by an invisible abyss, and I pretended to sleep while she scrolled through her phone in the dim light of the lamp. I counted the beats of my heart, wondering how much longer I could hold on. Then, one Friday night, it all came crashing down. I was at home waiting for her for dinner when I heard the key turn in the door. She came in smelling different, her perfume, something I knew without ever having seen her face. Her eyes avoided mine, and I knew without a doubt that she had just come back from a date. Something inside me snapped. I stood up slowly, my plate still untouched on the table, and asked in the calmest voice I could muster, "Was dinner good?" She froze. Her face drained of color, her eyes wide, as if a part of her had been stripped bare, cruelly exposed. But before she could answer, I said, "It's okay. You can go take a shower. The food is still hot." She hesitated, but then walked upstairs in silence, while I sat in the living room, staring into space, feeling the sound of the clock on the wall like a hammer in my head. I could hear the water in the shower, imagine each drop washing her body, the body that was no longer just mine. And in that moment, I realized that silence was a prison, and that I had to decide whether I would stay locked in it or finally open the door. That night, dinner went untouched. She came downstairs with her hair still wet, the smell of soap and shampoo trying to hide his perfume, but I had already memorized the smell of betrayal. She tried to act as if nothing had happened, smiled shyly, sat down at the table, moved the food on her plate, asked banal questions about my day, as if the act were enough to sustain a reality that was already falling apart. I answered in short sentences, feeling each word like a nail being driven into my chest. Inside, something was boiling. I knew that if I started talking, I wouldn't be able to stop, so I kept pretending. Why did I do it? Because silence, as cruel as it was, still felt safer than confrontation. Because as long as I kept quiet, she might keep coming home. And I could fool myself into believing that somehow things could go back to the way they were before. But that night, I saw the real her, not the woman I loved, not my partner of so many years, but someone who had chosen to betray me and pretended she hadn't done anything. It was like looking at a stranger wearing the skin of someone who once meant the world to me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why, to understand what was missing in me that she had found in someone else. But the words died in my throat, swallowed by a greater fear, the fear of losing what was left of us, even if it was just an illusion. The following days were silent torture. Her every gesture was a reminder of the open wound. Her every smile seemed loaded with poison. Her every "I love you" felt like a knife stuck in my back. I pretended not to know, but she also pretended not to notice the pain written all over my face. It was a dirty game, a cruel theater, and we were both the protagonists of a farce that dragged on without meaning. I looked at myself in the mirror and no longer recognized the man I saw. Exhaustion weighed on my shoulders, my eyes were sunken, my smile was absent. I was slowly fading away, and she didn't even seem to notice. Until one day, I had to leave work early. I got in the car and drove aimlessly, trying to escape my thoughts, but I ended up stopping near the cafe where she said she spent her afternoons studying. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to rip out of my chest. I knew it was wrong to be there, but something bigger was pushing me, as if the truth needed to be faced head-on. And there she was, sitting at a table in the corner, laughing, playing with her hair, with her cell phone on the table and his hand touching hers in an intimate, familiar way. They seemed happy, free, as if the world around them had disappeared. I watched the scene as a spectator, as someone who no longer had a place in that story. I drove home in silence, the steering wheel slipping in my sweaty hands, tears burning my eyes. Was this my life? A fake marriage? A lie I kept up out of fear? I got home, sat on the couch, my head pounding, and stayed there, motionless, for hours, not even noticing the night falling. When she came in, she smiled, asked if I was okay, kissed me on the forehead. I just nodded, biting back the words that threatened to burst out. But at that moment, something inside me changed. I understood that silence was no longer a protection. It was a prison. I could no longer pretend. That night, as she slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the dark ceiling and felt the weight of the world crashing down on me. Memories swirled together, the beginning, the love, the dreams, and now, this raw pain that burned inside. It was as if everything I had believed in was ripped from my hands, as if every memory was now a ghost laughing at me. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know how. I only knew that the silence was killing me, and that sooner or later I would have to speak up, or I would lose myself in the process. The next morning, she came down for breakfast, as she always did, but something in my expression made her pause. She asked, "Is everything all right?" And it was there, in that moment, with her voice shaking slightly, that I knew the theater was over for both of us, that the time to decide had come. I stared at her for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. It was as if every memory, every word said, every touch exchanged over the years passed before my eyes at a dizzying speed. And at the same time, everything seemed distant, as if the woman in front of me was just a shadow of what she once was. I could see on her face a mixture of fear and nervousness, as if she knew deep down that the masks were about to fall. She asked again, more hesitantly, "Is everything okay?" And I answered, with the calmest and coldest voice I had ever used in my life, "No, it's not." She stopped, her hand holding the coffee cup shaking slightly, her eyes wide, trying to decipher what was coming next. I stared at her in a way I probably never had before, with a brutal sincerity that burned my eyes. The silence between us was suffocating, thick as smoke from a fire. I stood up slowly, each movement feeling like it weighed a ton, and sat across from her, as if preparing for a final reckoning. I took a deep breath, looked into her eyes, and said bluntly, I know everything. I've known for weeks. I know about the touches, the looks, the hidden messages, the perfumes that aren't mine, the times that don't match. I know, and I'm tired of pretending I don't know." She went pale, her lips trembling, her eyes filled with a fear that for a second almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. But I couldn't feel sorry anymore, not after everything. She tried to say something, her voice coming out weak, but I raised my hand, asking for silence. I continued. "I chose to stay quiet because I thought I could bear it. I thought the love I felt for you was enough to swallow this pain. But now I realize that it isn't. I'm not alive here. I'm just a piece of myself, crushed by this theater that we insist on maintaining." She began to cry, silent sobs that filled the room. I felt her pain, but it was a selfish pain because deep down I knew she was crying more for fear of losing the comfort, the life we had, than for me. It was fear of being exposed, of being found out, of losing everything she had, not fear of losing me. She tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. "I saw you," I said, my voice low, barely above a whisper, but filled with a strength I hadn't known I had. "I saw you with him, at the cafe, laughing, like I was just an obstacle, a wall you had to get through." Her face fell. She stammered incoherently, trying to justify herself, but every sound that came out of her mouth sounded empty, meaningless, weightless. I interrupted her wearily. "You don't have to say anything, not now. I just want you to know that I know. And that I chose not to say anything because, until today, I was afraid of losing you. But now I'm afraid of losing myself. And I'm not going to let that happen." She looked at me like she was seeing a version of me she'd never met. The silence between us was almost palpable, a vacuum that seemed to swallow everything around it. And then something happened. Her phone vibrated on the table. His name lit up the screen. I stared at her. She stared at the phone like it was a gun about to go off, and then, with trembling fingers, she tried to hide it. But it was too late. I just got up from the table, grabbed my key, and before I left, I said, "You need to decide who you are. I already know who I am, and I'm not that man who just accepts everything in silence anymore." I walked out the door without looking back. The air outside felt lighter, but also colder. I walked aimlessly through the city streets, feeling the weight of the words I had said, the bitter taste of the pain that still burned. I knew that this story was not over. I knew that she would come after me, trying to fix what was perhaps impossible to mend. But in that moment, something inside me finally broke free. I was no longer a prisoner of silence. I was no longer a hostage to hidden pain. I was just a man who chose not to pretend anymore. The days that followed were a strange emptiness, as if the world around me had changed its color, its sound, its rhythm. I lived on autopilot, waking up, going to work, coming home, but everything seemed different. Every detail of the house bore her mark. The smell on the pillow, the cup forgotten in the sink, the coat thrown on the armchair. Each object was a cruel reminder of everything that had been broken. I didn't answer her calls. I didn't reply to her messages. I didn't want to hear the excuses she was surely preparing. I needed time, space, silence. But not the silence that suffocated me before, but the silence that helped me breathe again. On the third night, as I stared at the dark ceiling of the living room, I heard the key in the door. My heart pounded, my muscles tensed, but I didn't get up. She came in slowly, almost like a child afraid of being scolded. Her steps hesitant, her hands shaking as she held her purse. She found me sitting on the couch, the television off, the lights dimmed. She stood there as if she didn't know if she could speak, if she could exist within that space where I now breathed alone. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice hoarse, marked by the tears she had probably shed in some dark corner of the city. I didn't answer. She sat down on the couch next to me, but she seemed miles away. She began to speak, running her words over and over, saying that it had been a mistake, that it was just a moment of weakness, that she didn't know what she was doing. Each sentence was like an empty echo, because I had already heard all these justifications on other faces, in other voices, in stories that friends told or that I had seen in movies. I was no longer the man willing to believe excuses. She was silent for a moment, and the silence between us grew again. But this time it was different. I looked at her, tired, exhausted from holding the weight of a relationship that, to me, had died. She looked back at me, and in that look, I saw despair. Not for what she had done, but for what she was about to lose. The home, the routine, the comfort, the false stability. She begged me to forgive her, told me that I was everything to her, that it meant nothing. But that was the point. To me, it meant everything. "Do you understand what you did to me?" I asked, my voice low, controlled, but sharp as a blade. She cried more, shook her head, tried to come closer, but I pulled away. I stood up and began to pace the room, like a caged lion, trying to find the air I was lacking. "I knew," I continued, unable to hold it in any longer. "I knew everything. I saw the messages, the meetings. I saw you. I heard the lies. And yet, I kept going. I kept pretending everything was okay because I was afraid of being alone, afraid of admitting that it was all over. But now I understand that this fear was killing me, and I'm not going to live like this anymore." She cried. She begged. She fell to her knees. She held my hands. But it felt like a rehearsed scene, like we were acting in a bad, predictable play. I slowly pulled my hands away, looked at her, and said, "I would forgive the betrayal. I would forgive even the pain. But I can't forgive what it did to me. I can't forgive the man I became trying to keep you." She was silent, and in that moment, I saw it. She understood. She understood that it wasn't about her anymore. It was about me, about my dignity, my self-respect, my need to breathe without carrying the weight of guilt that wasn't mine. I turned to leave, but before she could say anything else, I stopped and added, "I don't hate you. And maybe in time I'll even be able to forgive you, but I'm not going to pretend anymore, and I'm not going to stay anymore." And then I left the house behind. Its smell, its objects, its history, everything. I walked down the street, feeling the cold wind on my face, as if the world was finally giving me back the freedom I didn't even know I had lost. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if I would find a new love, a new home, a new life. But in that moment, I knew the most important thing. I had chosen myself, and that was the hardest and most liberating decision of my life. Time passed, and the city continued to spin as if nothing had happened. But inside me, there was a new silence, a silence that no longer hurt, but that pulsed like an open field after a storm. It was strange to wake up and not feel her presence, not hear the sound of her footsteps in the hallway, not smell her perfume on the pillow. But at the same time, there was a lightness that I couldn't explain, as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. In the first few days, I still waited for a text, a call, a knock on the door. But nothing came. And deep down, I knew that this was for the best. I went back to doing things I had forgotten. I went back to running in the park, feeling the wind on my face as a reminder that I was alive. I went back to cooking for myself, choosing the ingredients calmly, as if each meal were an act of self-love. I went back to listening to music she didn't like, watching movies I wanted to watch, sleeping on the side of the bed I preferred. I went back to being the master of my life. But sometimes the pain would come back, in flashes. A smell on the street, a couple holding hands, a laugh that sounded like hers. It was like ghosts were haunting me, whispering memories that I was trying to bury. I remembered the promises, the plans, the nights we thought we would be happy. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't erase it all. Because that's not how pain works. It doesn't disappear overnight. It settles, turns into a scar, but it's always there. One day, as I was walking aimlessly through the city, my eyes fell on a couple sitting on a park bench. They were laughing, sharing a coffee, their faces lit by the afternoon sun. And in that moment, something inside me broke, or maybe it was released. I realized that true love isn't about empty promises or about pretending everything is okay while the world falls apart. True love is about looking into someone's eyes and knowing that you are safe, that you can be who you are without fear of betrayal, without having to mutilate yourself to fit into someone else's mold. I realized that for so long, I had confused love with need, with attachment, with fear of being alone. But truly loving was knowing when to let go. It was accepting that not all love is forever, and that that's okay. Because truly loving someone sometimes means letting that person go, and choosing above all, yourself. I went home that night feeling something new. It wasn't happiness, it wasn't sadness. It was peace. A quiet, serene peace, like the breeze that blows through a window on a summer morning. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I saw myself. Not the man destroyed by pain, not the man who pretended, not the man who erased himself to hold on to something that no longer existed. I saw someone whole, someone who had been through the fire and come out the other side, scarred, yes, but alive. And it was at that moment that I understood. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is freeing yourself from the pain. It is saying, I know what you did. I know what I did to put up with this. And I choose to move on. Not because the other person deserves it, but because you deserve it. Because life doesn't wait. Because time doesn't stop. And because we only have one chance to be happy. I don't know what the future holds for me. Maybe I'll find another love. Maybe I won't. But I know for sure that I'll never again pretend I don't know. I'll never again betray myself to sustain what isn't real. And in some strange way, I'm grateful to her. Because it was in the moment she betrayed me that I learned to truly love myself. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself facing a new phase of grief. Real emptiness. Because once the decision is made, once the words are spoken, once the door is closed, the silence changes shape. Before, it was the suffocating silence of someone keeping a secret. Now, it was the heavy silence of someone living with the consequences. There were no more excuses, no more pretense, no more, maybe tomorrow. There was just me, my apartment, and the loneliness that was now my constant companion. Sometimes I still felt the urge to hear her voice, the foolish instinct to pick up the phone and ask how she was, how her day had been, if she had eaten, if she was okay. It was as if my body was still wired to love someone who no longer existed in my life. But each time the urge arose, I remembered the look in her eyes when the truth was revealed. Not a look of pure regret, but a look of fear of the consequences. of fear of losing comfort. And that memory was my antidote. I started writing, maybe to keep from going crazy, maybe because words were the only place where I could still exist without pretending. I wrote about pain, about love, about what it means to be betrayed, about what it means to forgive. And little by little, I began to understand that what hurt me was not just the betrayal itself, but the loss of my own voice. Because for so long I had stopped being myself to mold myself to someone else's expectations. I had kept quiet, held back my tears, erased my desires, all to maintain an illusion of happiness. I realized that true love doesn't require you to disappear, that loving someone doesn't mean abandoning yourself. That yes, it is possible to forgive, but true forgiveness only comes when you choose yourself first. And then, one afternoon, as the sun streamed through the curtains and created golden patterns on the living room floor, I received a message from her. It was short, almost shy. "Can I come over and talk?" I stared at that sentence for minutes that felt like hours. I knew what she wanted. I knew she would come with tears in her eyes, sweet words, maybe even promises of change. But more than that, I knew she came because she was afraid of being alone. I took a deep breath, and for the first time, I answered clearly, "No, it's not about you anymore. It's about me now." At that moment, something shifted inside me. I saw myself as the man I needed to be, someone who knew how to say no, who knew how to protect himself, who knew what he deserved. And I knew with absolute certainty that what I deserved was not a hasty apology or an empty promise. I deserved peace. I deserved respect. I deserved love. And most of all, I deserved myself. I deleted the message and stood up. Life was waiting for me outside, and I was ready for it. That night, after deleting her message, I left my house for the first time without the weight of guilt, without the ghost of pain haunting me. I walked through the city streets as if it were the first time. Each step, a silent manifestation of freedom. The streetlights seemed brighter, the smell of rain on the asphalt was more intense, and the cold wind on my face was almost a celebration. I felt alive, not completely healed, because scars don't disappear overnight, but alive in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I stopped at a coffee shop we used to frequent, ordered a black coffee, and sat alone at a table by the window. I watched the people passing by outside, couples holding hands, children running, old people talking. And for the first time, I didn't feel envy, I didn't feel pain, I didn't feel that tightness in my chest that came every time I saw a happy couple. I just watched, because finally I understood that the love I had sought in her eyes needed to be found within myself first. When the coffee arrived, I held the warm cup in my hands and took a deep breath. And it was there, in that simple moment, that I made the most important decision of my life. I would no longer carry the weight of betrayal. I would not let the pain define me. I would not be the bitter man, nor the one who drowned in resentment, nor the one who closed himself off from the world. I would be the man who learned from the pain, who accepted what had happened, but who chose to move on. Not because it was easy, but because it was the right thing to do. I forgave her. I didn't say it to her. I didn't need to write it or send a message. I forgave her inside, in silence. Because forgiving isn't forgetting. Forgiving is understanding that the pain belongs to the past, and that the present is an opportunity to be different, to be better, to be stronger. I forgave her because I needed to be free. Over the next few months, I began to rebuild my life. I moved the furniture around, painted the walls, changed the photos. I deleted social media for a while, then came back with new connections. I met new people without rushing, without expectations. Sometimes I felt lonely, yes, but it was a different kind of solitude. A chosen solitude that didn't crush me. It was a space to listen to myself, to get to know myself. And then one day, almost without realizing it, I smiled for real. Not a forced smile, Not a smile for others, but a smile that came from within, that made me feel proud of myself. I looked in the mirror and saw a man who had been through hell and back. A man who knew what it was to love, to lose, to rebuild himself. A man who knew that forgiving is not giving someone else a second chance, but giving yourself a new chance. Today, when I look back, I no longer feel angry. I feel grateful. Because that pain taught me that truly loving someone starts when you choose yourself first. And if one day she comes back, with sweet words or with eyes filled with regret, I will know what to say. I wish you peace, but my love is now mine. And I will no longer give it to someone who did not know how to care for it. Because in the end, that's the greatest lesson of all. You can only give love when you have love for yourself. And I chose to love myself. I chose to free myself. I chose to live. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Maybe this story will be the relief or courage he or she has been waiting for. Leave a like if this story touched you. It helps me to continue telling these stories with all my truth. Always remember, love is important, but loving yourself is essential. Today, I choose myself.